Performance. So one of the 6 big picture offers that we have is around performance. So if you want to find out any more about what we're going to look at today, if you go to yourbigpick.com/performance, and that sits alongside finance, strategy, onboarding, learning, and change. So there are 6 there that we think cover some of the biggest challenges facing organizations when it comes to engagement. And we're all about bottom up, engaging colleagues, activating those colleagues so they can be more effective in the workplace, particularly now where there are so many challenges around. Every week we run a different theme around engagement, and this week it's performance. So what we're going to run through is an exercise, a simulation around our offer around performance. And what we believe in is that getting the colleague involved as a two-way dialogue, rather than them just filling out a Q&A or a tick box exercise. It's all about that engagement. What we don't want is to increase any form of anxiety or discomfort when that email arrives and it pings in the inbox saying your performance review is coming up, we have to do this, it's a compliance exercise. All that negative messaging is not much use, I think, to our wider team and our colleagues. So we spin around with big picture. We've actually got a tool here which we can help colleagues engage. And what we're going to do with Tunch today is Tunch is going to run the main body of this. I'm just going to do a bit of introduction. We're going to hand Tunch to go through an exercise. It is going to be interactive. I am going to introduce you to some tech and to some symbols. For those of you who've not been on a webinar before and maybe you're watching the recording, I am going to give you some introduction. So you'll see on screen, if I just focus in on this, I have sent you out this as a resource. It's one of the links in the emails. I have pared back the business conversation to such a simple degree that everybody can get involved. But when you join these dots in the form of symbols together, it really comes alive, and we're going to be connecting as many of these dots today in the context of performance. This is what the symbols mean. I'm going to quickly whip through them. If you see this symbol, this is a team symbol. So we'll be playing with this today. You'll see it on both the Google Jamboard when we go through the performance story, and it's also on the digital kit. So the team symbol is going to feature heavily today. If we move on, we've seen the customer symbol already. It's the same as the team. Business is all about people, but it's got a yellow background. We talk about customer. We have a technology symbol, which is all about the tech and kit. We won't touch on that so much today. Measures, we will touch on that. That's how you measure something, how you know something is good. You might measure it. That could be from both a personal perspective around performance, but it also could be used for an organizational measure. So we look for this pattern where something is important to you to get right, but it also could mean something that makes the organization good. So you end up with this couplet, and that good conversation between that connection is always a good idea. Money, probably not talk about this so much today, but if your brain's whirring around thinking, how might this work for change or finance? Clearly money comes into play. And the least attractive of the symbols, if I may say so, the process symbol, but I've had to pinch that one from a global standard to mean process, so any form of procedure. Now, the idea being is if we have these, the knowledge of these symbols, and we give this knowledge out to our colleagues, then they can join their own dots. So this is about, in a very short space of time, giving you all individually the knowledge of what these symbols mean, so you can start joining them yourself. And in a performance context, we're going to suggest you maybe think about these as you tell your story, but it is almost like the art of suggestion. The main thing is that you tell your story, but if you start to notice you're talking about a process, a measure, or something about the team, then that's why we can weave it through onto the big picture board. And that's why we've got 2 resources today. We've got a challenge symbol, which looks like that should be instantly recognizable. And we've got, last but not least, when we've got all that negative energy, we've got the opportunity symbol. Now, the reason I'm reaching, we're going to do that, as I said, in 2 places. We're going to use today a Google Jamboard, and that is now live and open. And if I share my screen, you should be able to see that on screen. This is the same Jamboard that you're in. So you'll notice at the top of my screen, I can see at least 8 people in, which is the digital kit. Again, this is collaborative and you've all got a link into this. So if at any point you want to go into the resource drawer on the left with this spanner, drag on your own team symbol and change it to your name. You just double click it and a little pen comes up. You can type it, and this is basically me saying, I'm Mart and I work in operations. And if you want to zoom in, you can. These are both collaborative tools. So both the Jamboard and the digital kit is a shared resource between us.
And we see performance from this is something that starts from the day the colleagues get onboarded with the business, and the performance progresses through by ongoing learning up until the colleague reaches their passion that is aligned to companies or the organization's aims and objectives. So on the first chapter of the best performance journey, we created the foundations by using a unique 6 stages storytelling method by connecting the dots, which went on as from the day colleagues started. There was a time when something happened, and then followed by every day, then followed by, then one day is the realization, a moment of truth. And because of that realization and because of that value, it reached to a certain stage of colleague's career. Now, I would like to introduce you quickly to somebody, a real life case scenario here, which I examined and also tested on a colleague that works with me. This colleague, I'm going to name him as Mike because of privacy. A boy named Mike was employed to carry out a daily stockroom tasks. Every day, Mike turned up for work and put the delivery away on his own and worked in the stockroom. So then one day, Mike reflected on this and reflected on his passions to lead a team. Because of that, he sought guidance from his senior managers and collaborated with his colleagues. He also joined some development courses to upskill himself. And because of that, he gained the trust of his peers. He could start leading a team. And as a result of this, today, we have got a proud team leader who provides guidance to his peers. This was the foundation's journey of Mike's career. And this was the topic of our first performance storytelling. So this way, we help to identify, I helped Mike to identify his own needs and his own passions and how he could align them to our own company objectives. And therefore, Mike would feel motivated in the job. He feels like he's valued, and he actually contributes towards the success of the business. Yesterday, like I explained, I tested the journeyman on Mike by asking him to add one-liners, how he sees his progression so far since the day he's joined the courses and they started developing and taking over leadership role, which is fantastic of him. And what didn't really work to the plan. So we are going to now name it on I will stop. I am going to stop doing this. And then what he would like to start doing to develop himself further, which is what
so we'll move on to,
I'm going to try.
We'll move on to slide 2 now. This is where everybody can get involved, because what Tunch is going to do is he's going to explain this structure. You'll see there's a familiarity to it. Remember, if your brain wants to do some gymnastics, you'll notice symbols at each of the 6 boxes that Tunch is going to take us through. When he introduces the boxes, obviously listen to what he's saying, create the post-it for you, maybe your own story, and maybe think a little bit about the symbols, because we won't have a lot of time to go into the symbols, but each box has a suggestion in a symbol. And I'm fascinated by this because I think the way we associate our stories with symbols and the way we connect our dots makes people process, think, and get their story across quicker. And that's the hypothesis that we're proving with this approach. So over to Tunch to introduce this on page 2 of the Jamboard. Okay.
Basically, these are the sentences, one-liners Mike used with me yesterday. What is going to stop? I am going to stop relying heavily on my managers to make decisions, he said yesterday. And he said he's going to start trusting himself, his knowledge, and make judgment and use his own initiatives when he's challenging situations. Your comment, please. Are you easily distracted? Is that what you mean? Or how does that impact on your work?
It's the reasons why I get distracted. One, I have a high degree of interest in virtually everything. Introduce an idea, introduce a topic, and I get heavily involved in it. I kind of have to self-regulate in some way. But on the flip side of that, I also have a lot of knowledge in a lot of different areas at a very granular level. So I'm able to join into different discussions at different levels, at different skill sets, I suppose. And the byproduct of that is a single thought can turn into 100. So I can get very easily distracted, and the ability to prioritize becomes a bit trickier, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm one of the things that I find easiest to do, because I update the business plans every 3 months, to really just copy and paste. It's so much easier just to copy and paste, whereas in fact, and most of the time it works out, but I want to stop doing that. And I'm writing the second note now, which is to physically look at how I can improve the goals that I've got by changing them, so that it doesn't just become a habit.
It's interesting that the way the person worked with the team is interesting. How did the team align to him who don't think like him? Because you've actually said this guy's really different. How did that impact on the rest of the team?
Oh, well, that's why we are going to be leading to towards the end of this story. But to give you a brief hint on that one, his attitude is second to none. If it is limited capacity and abilities, he always tried to do the best he can, even though his work was extremely repetitive. However, he never gave up on the quality of the work he was putting in and the attitude. So that really did impress all his other colleagues, who didn't really pull the strings as good as him or as much as him, or didn't really try as much. And so this way, he actually helped the leaders and other managers in the business to develop rest of the team and motivate rest of the team through looking at him as a guide, really. So that was one thing. His attitude really did play an important part of it. And his can-do attitude, I would say.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I employed someone just like that. And they didn't want to work with him initially. And then we said, this guy can think differently. How about asking him a different question? And it opened up all these possibilities. So thank you.
If I can. Right, on the third one, we are also going to be looking at what worked well, so what we want to keep on doing. So from Mike's point of view, he said to me he would be pushing himself to move out of his comfort zone to build his self-confidence. Because currently as a leader, as we mentioned before, one of his challenges is about making decisions and using his own initiative. So, and he feels that it's his comfort zone. If he asks or relies heavily on his other managers or senior management to make the decisions, so he wants to start pushing himself out of that comfort zone, build his confidence, and make those decisions.
I think obviously you've mentioned it in relation to your colleague, and I think that often it's a matter of persisting. And from what you've said, he is someone who tries to perfect himself and wants to be better. And that means that he persists when things don't go well. And I think for me, that's a quality that is very useful in people. And it's one that personally I believe is one I should continue doing rather than give up on things. Keep going until hopefully you make some sort of breakthrough.
It's people do respond differently, and it's about being aware of those feelings and what tools you bring to the table to help people not be scared to verbalize those emotions as well, and it's just to help the organization move forward to get over the hurdle.
Thank you. Yeah, two, because of that, so that is because the first, because of that, is actually represents the value the colleague brings to the table that aligns himself and his progress to the company or the organization's values as well. And because of that, a realignment, we want to achieve the overall objective. So what I would say is, from Mike's point of view, he stated that because of that, by pushing himself, making the connections, getting out of the comfort zone, he will be able to make confident decisions, and he will be taking ownership of the decision making and using his own initiative himself as a leader, and he will shine this onto his colleagues as well. So that was Mike's because of that, and by doing so, the second because of that, he will become an all-rounder leader where the colleagues will be looking up to him, seeking guidance. From the point where he was the one who was seeking guidance, he will be the one where the colleagues will come up to or look up to seek guidance as a leader in the business.
That's a really positive statement, that choice of language in the 6 box, I will be, with will in capitals. As a storytelling technique, I think it's important to finish on that really positive statement of I will be. By that point, the colleague with this in their hand in front of them in a paper form or digitally will be making a really positive statement. At that point, you're sat back as the thought leader, allowing them to express what it's like a hero story. What will they be going forward? That's the intent with this 6 box.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's what it's about, valuing yourself and the team and where you're going to take them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've had some like aha or awareness moments by following this structure through in a storytelling format. And I think the storytelling format is incredibly accessible and straightforward, particularly if it's designed in a way that is non-threatening and actually something that people would want to interact with. Now, what I would draw your attention to at this point, and this is where we extend the approach from just that one page and that storytelling technique. I'm just moving the post-its aside a little bit. What we would go into at this point, if I just expose the symbols, is you'll notice those symbols from earlier around the different symbols. So for instance, on that bottom left box, Nick has put his achieve goals sooner, and that is referring to the measure. So what we would do is develop that conversation in the time we had using these physical props and the symbols, because what we've expressed so far is probably 75% personal performance, i.e. their story, then themselves, but obviously we're working in the reality of the context of the organization. And this is where I'm just going to give you an insight into how you then link this story, which is incredibly personal, to the actual performance on that. Now, I've flipped to the digital kit, and this is the second resource we're going to use because we're going to do it in a much shorter space of time. Now, what I can see Hugh's done there, and I'm going to come to you, Hugh, as an example and zoom in, is that you've already in the background, almost in parallel, gone on there and you've put something on here in the organizational context that means your personal story has landed. And in a very, very blunt way, you've put it in management and admin. So you're automatically landing yourself, and anyone else can drag on a team symbol if they've got access to the board. If you haven't, we're going to time out. But if we'd set this up with an orientation, we would then go and talk about the organizational objectives. And for those familiar with big picture, and even those that aren't, at the top, we would probably start with the context in terms of the purpose of the organization. And then Hugh, as he's done, has picked up a team symbol and landed it in management and admin, probably more management than admin. And he's landed his opportunity symbol for discussing 12 months goals. So you've already translated your personal story into the organizational context. So if you can just unpack that for a couple of minutes, Hugh.
Yeah, it's the journey I was talking about was like Tunj was saying, about somebody who comes onboarded into a business or a company. For me, the most important part of that is that I talk to the upline before we put together a program for the person who's onboarding. So many times people come on and maybe they're given a mentor who's a peer. But to me, the most important part is that if you're his upline, you must have a plan for this person. And that plan should be something that is given to me as his mentor, so that I can then share with that person onboarding what their plans are for him for the next 12 months. Otherwise, it's all sort of goosey-loosey. And unfortunately, I find a lot of onboarding is done like that. We don't actually talk to the upline beforehand to know what the upline is looking for this person for the next 12 months.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thanks, Hugh. And whilst you've been talking now, I've been picking up and interpreting, because we could be sat next to each other doing this. So I added a measure for goals and a plan, a process. And the reason I've added me next to you is because we would all be landing each other and ourselves on the same board. So what that suggests is if you're talking about that in management and administration, then maybe you and I would be having a conversation as to my role within management and your role as well. So it would mean that we're landing on the same board. And if we zoom out, then other people such as Nick and John and Alex and Bryce, you know, Bill, all of us would be on that board. So what we're doing is we're taking the personal story and landing it within the organizational context, and then you can introduce organizational measures. And what I like about this is the fact once you see your own measure against the organizational measure, you don't have to push too hard to actually help that individual, whether it's Mike, explain why their own personal goal is actually going to help the organization. And I think that subtlety and that different perspective is really important. And in my experience, it's never balanced that well. And I think what we're doing here is seeking a balance by having the two sides of the balance visible on the table. So Mike's looking down at his personal story. And the example I always use is Mike might say, you know, one of my goals is I want to get away by 4 o'clock every day because of my domestics. There are things going on. That's one of my personal things. I want to do my job as well as I can, but I need to get away by 4 o'clock. The organization will have its own goals and objectives to achieve. And therefore, Mike might have a really good idea that he's quite happy to come in 2 hours earlier to get his hours done and achieve the organizational objective. But by leaving at 4 o'clock, he's meeting his own objectives as well. And that conversation for me is fair, equitable, and balanced. And that's why I like this balance of approach, which features as the performance offer at Your Big Pick. And we're bang on time. So that's been a rapid fire simulation of the performance offer. Right? Anybody else who hasn't had a chance to express a thought at this point want to add in? Because we've got 5 or 10 minutes, however long you want to do that.
Yeah, no, just the whole approach I quite liked. Again, the attractiveness of Big Pick, you know, simplifying things down to what is essentially the lowest common denominator makes sense. And what's been interesting this week is seeing how you're utilizing, you know, simple ideas and then, you know, adjusting the framework that you're having that conversation within. So this week, looking at the storyboard as the individual, then bringing it back up into the digital board. We're just before we started recording, we were having this conversation about the value is when you consolidate or aggregate the individuals as the whole. And this, funny enough, the conversation that we just had shows how that's done.
Yeah. That's what I found interesting, Nick, when we were doing this. It's the first time I've noticed this, because I always have seen this done with individuals, like one-on-ones. What I noticed is if you're having this kind of chat with colleagues, you are obviously influenced and learned from that. And that gives you ideas as well. And what it's opened up the possibility for me is it maybe doesn't always have to be a one-on-one chat. Maybe it could be done in a smaller group where maybe it's not quite as personal, but actually you are learning from each other. So it's still a performance conversation, but it's done with colleagues alongside. Tunch, I don't know if you've got a view on that. You've been in these rooms more than I have with regard to performance. So I think that's a trade-off conversation. I don't know if it's all good.
That's a very interesting comment, Martin, because just before we started recording, Nick asked me the same question. He asked me whether it would work with a small group of people as well as it would work with the one-to-one basis. Now, I think the point is here, going to Bill's point earlier on, about what makes other people click, what inspires other people. That is the most important part of it, I think, because this type of story, a real lifetime story from one colleague with his attitude, can-do attitude, no matter what the challenges that he is facing, is actually an inspiration to the rest of the group. So it kills that excuse, can't do, I don't believe in this type of attitude, and turns it into a growth mindset in the whole group and helps them to identify and see it themselves and put their heads down and say, right, I am going to stop thinking this way. I'm going to start doing A, B, C, D whilst I'm carrying on by doing X, Y, and Z. So this way, I believe it would work and it would be effective within a group as well. Because everybody needs some kind of a great story, and that, like the Pixar says, what makes modern stories, Pixar says, compelling is our perceptions of the reality when we are actually challenged in a different way and start looking at it from different perspectives. And just by keeping it simple, one simple sentence or one-liner can be a big make or break sentence.
Yeah, and I think we shouldn't miss out on the fact that was shared, and we went over it quite quick. The speed, there was a point of hesitation earlier when I was deliberating with myself. When you told your story, Tunch, and recounted it this morning, you spent 10 minutes with Mike going through this because of the one-liners. It was like bang, bang, bang. And my observation of organizations often is that there is a perception we can't engage at this level with all our colleagues because we haven't got the time. So what happens is they send out the awful Q&A engagement survey, ironically, which they send it out because there's a perception they can't do it in a time. But if you're uncovering the useful truth from Mike in 10 minutes using this prop, with a view to Mike then landing his team symbol in the business, which might be a surprise to you, in the organizational context, then in 15 minutes, a colleague has told a very emotional personal journey in the context of the organizational objectives, and it's been done in 15 minutes. Scale that up to the team, you then have an accelerant and a catalyst for changing the way that those performance conversations are going on, because a lot of people in this chat have used the word simple. We paired it back to a point where the speed of information flow has increased. The hypothesis being the simpler and better you make the simple framework, the faster and more effective the outputs. And that's the direction of travel for all of these approaches. But I think it's been demonstrated wonderfully this week for performance.
I was just looking, yesterday I was doing some reading, and this sort of, I suppose, applies more to Hugh's experience, within sort of finance. And I know that both Hugh now think in the same light in terms of we're always thinking about, well, where's the return on this? Where's the commercial return on this? Do you know what I mean? And the interesting is going through this, the storyboard, and then linking it into the symbols from Big Pick. The thing that stands out there is we have a measure, and by definition, it means it's quantifiable. So I was reading an article yesterday about the challenges of CFOs. And one of the challenges of CFOs is getting data up to that level. It's counting for the data and making sure it's accurate and such and such. And there was arguments to say that, CFOs need to be more arbiters of change, if that makes sense. So they need to get more involved in the organizations. But it's taking a quantifiable measure and pushing it up to your, to the CFO level, if you will. And because you're able to push that measure up to that level, you can now sort of start to assess its return or, the financial impact on that.
And is it, Nick, the tension between, or the healthy tension between a measure that shouldn't we start with the measure that makes sense to the individual, because that's the one that is closer to them to get the conversation started, and then translate it onto the big picture boards? Because often if you start with the organizational objectives, if you go into performance review talking about organizational objectives first, that is probably going to have the reverse effect, that people will be like, what's in it for me? Why should I care? But if you're going to ask me about my story, and I've exposed the two measure symbols on the share, one is in the second box, the I'm going to try something, which probably should be measured. That's the kind of smart mnemonic, probably. And then because of that, we should probably see a result. So there are two measures on here at least that we would encourage the colleague to uncover and articulate, which could then be taken onto the board and translated into organizational objectives, or recognize that they're nothing to do with the organizational objective, and that's a conversation in itself. Why should there be? People will be in work judging good with nothing to do with the organizational objectives?
I mean, let's go back to my example. From a financial point of view, one of the things that we account for is time. If you look at my second measure on that storyboard, within the statement, which was pure accident, within the statement itself, it says achieve goals sooner. By definition, I'm individually referring to time.
Yeah.
Right. So breaking it down to a common understanding, time is something that you can relate back up to your financial, to the financial component of the business.
Yeah.
You know, and this is where you can start to see the relationship and the impact. So for me, it's about framing. And like you say, if you initially frame things in the organizational context, i.e. what are the organizational goals, all of a sudden you're asking somebody to think in the context of the bigger picture as opposed to their picture.
Yeah. And if it's that individual doing it, then all the better, because if we tell them it's not true, if they tell us or share that, it is true, or more likely to be true, because it's their truth, not ours. So I think we'll close that down. I always like the after kind of discussion. If you were on last week, I asked people to feed back in a particular way, which is they get the link through to the first and second law of engagement. The first being, how many minutes of this afternoon session did you feel we were sharing useful truths, and how many of our wonderful group were engaged in that? It's a subjective judgment of yours, and when I send you through the form, please complete it as honestly and as quickly as you wish. It's interesting, it then calculates an engagement coefficient for this meeting, because we like to practice what we preach. The second law talks about the ideas and the gems that we created. Some of this dialogue contains at least ideas, and I think some of it contains gems as well. So just make a judgment, don't spend too long thinking about it. And that's how we like to take feedback back. If you want to know more, go to yobbiepick.com/performance. Thank you very much to Tunch for leading us through that. I love how this offer is developing in and around big picture. We're extending the approach out for this prop that Mike enjoyed doing. Hopefully you all did today. And next week, we have our last webinar of the year with Hugh. We're going to be focusing on finance, a Christmas special, Hugh. I don't know if it's dress up. We haven't discussed this yet.
Well, I might dress up.
Well,
maybe I'll wear a dress.
Well, there's the marketing.
Don't tempt me, Nick, please.
There's the marketing done, and he will sees into amateur dramatics, but I think that started before the amateur dramatics. We will be running that next week, just pre-Christmas, and it'll be the 54th next week before Christmas, and then we'll be back in the new year with them every 2 weeks. It's a little community. For those new to us, thank you for joining. John, it's been great to have you, and thanks for contributing.
Yeah, thank you very much.
There's a bit of a community. Please feel free to check out /webinars at yobbiepick.com, a different theme each week, and I'll send you some requests for feedback and further thoughts next week. It'd be really interesting in finding out how everybody sees it helping them, even if it's a seed or story that you can tell people. I went on this webinar, they were trying this thing that is an extension of big picture, and we think it could work. Please go and talk to them. We've got an associate kind of model We've got wonderful partners in our ecosystem, and we're all open for business and collaboration, even if it's facilitation techniques, specific performance techniques, or any of the other offers. So I wish you all a fantastic weekend. The boards will stay open if you want to play or get a PDF printed off to remember your time. And I will chat to you all next week, and have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Thanks very
guys.
much. Bye bye.
Bye for now.